Hola, bienvenidos a Aprendamos Español 2. Yo soy Dr. Daniel Viamonte, su maestro de Español 2, y juntos con su facilitador vamos a terminar lección 3 de unidad 5. Bueno, la última vez, ¿en qué decimos? Nosotros leímos las 3 cartas. We talked about the present subjunctive with subject change. We talked about expressions of anticipation or reaction and the subjunctive. We also added additional words to help us in food menu variety. The homework that was due for today, the assigned tarea. Número 1, dime 2, página 263, actividad B, 1 hasta 8. La segunda tarea, también en Dime 2, página 264, actividad C, 1 hasta 6, actividad C, 1 hasta 8, y actividad D, 1 hasta 8. We also assigned for homework number 3, find either on the internet or ask for a copy of a menu from a Spanish restaurant to translate some of the dishes. Remember to use the terminology that we reviewed last time. Facilitator, would you please collect the homework now? Hoy nosotros vamos a discutir. Para empezar, escuchemos una leyenda española, las ánimas. We're going to use the subjunctive with the word estar. We're going to take a look at strategies for reading, predicting, making descriptions, and comparisons, paraphrasing, checking for understanding, and readjusting our impressions as we read Spanish materials. We're going to be reading the article on Antonio Banderas, un galán latino en Hollywood. If you'll open your textbooks, Dime 2, to page 258. Here we find, para empezar, escuchemos una leyenda española, Los Ánimas. Now, in this story from Andalusia, Spain, 3 spirits come to the rescue of a nice but lazy young woman whose future husband has high expectations of her skills as a homemaker. Now, you will hear in this story, as we review the material, many examples of talking about feelings and emotions. If we can place ourselves back into this time period, the new colonization of the New World by Spain created an enormous new avenue for wealth, fame, and adventure for many young Spanish men. Much like our own history, when we began to open up the West, such phrases as Horace Greeley's "Go West, young man," signified an opportunity for adventure, an opportunity for possible riches. We saw this happen over and over in our history. The gold rush in California and Alaska, the oil wells in Texas, Oklahoma, and California attracted many young men to fame and fortune. In modern times, we have seen things like the Silicon Valley and all of the high-tech areas all over the country where opportunities with computer software, .com companies opened up tremendous opportunities for young men to make their fame and their riches. Well, There were similar opportunities available for young men in Spain at that particular time. Phrases and expressions like hacer las Américas or hacer las Indias meant seeking one's fortune in the New World. The theme of the rich Indiano, meaning on who has been to the Indies, who returns to Spain, is an important and enduring one in Spanish culture and literature. As we begin to translate the story, there were 3 skills that the young women lacked. They lacked hilar, coser, and bordar. Hilar is the ability to spin. You know, you used to have a spinning wheel, and you would make from wool the yarn in which to make dresses and materials. Coser meant to sew, and they either sewed by hand or by primitive sewing machines. Bordar, the ability to embroider. Now, why do you think this was important? Are these things expected today of young women? Well, I suppose today we might ask if a potential bride can cook. Maybe can she clean house, operate a complicated sewing machine, maybe even run a household. So as we start the story, we learn that this legend concerned an Indiano that made himself very rich with the gold and silver that he brought from the Americas. Now, if you'll take a look in frame number 1 on page 258. Once upon a time, there was in Andalusia an old woman with a beautiful and good niece, but the niece was very lazy. Now the old woman feared dying and leaving the poor niece without a husband. Who would want to marry her? She did not even know how to spin or sew or embroider. She knew how to do nothing. In frame number 2, one day, an Indiano, very rich, very handsome, who wanted to get married, arrived in town. Now the aunt immediately went to the gentleman and told him that she had a niece with so many talents that she would have to write a book to list them all. He responded that he would very much like to meet her. In frame number 3, on the following day, when the rich Indiano saw the young lady, he instantly fell in love with her. But, as he was a practical man, he decided to ask the aunt if her niece knew how to spin. "Oh, of course," said the old woman. "She loves to spin. That's one of her major likes." In a little while, there began to arrive many servants with many skeins of flax linen. The boss of the servants explained to the young lady, "The master of my house said that by tomorrow, all of these skeins ought to be spun." In frame number 4, the young woman began to cry because she didn't know how to spin. "Oh, how sorry I am that I do not know how to spin," she said, because she too had fallen in love with this handsome Indiano. In that very instant, 3 good spirits, dressed in white, appeared and began to immediately get to work. When all of the skeins had been transformed into fine linen, they disappeared. When the next morning came, the rich Indiano gentleman was very impressed. Frame number 5 on top of page 259. But later, he decided that he ought to know if his future wife knew how to sew. He asked the old woman, and she confirmed by saying, "Sewing is a pleasure for her, and she does it very quickly." And again that afternoon, the gentleman's servants arrived, carrying pieces of linen or cloth, saying, "Our master says that the young lady ought to make jackets and shirts of cloth for him." In frame number 6. Oh, and again the young lady knew nothing about cutting or sewing, and she began to cry. But during the night, the 3 spirits returned, and in a short period of time, all of the linen was transformed into jackets and shirts. The Indiano gentleman could not believe that he had a girlfriend so clever. In frame number 7. But later, the rich gentleman wanted to know if the young lady knew how to embroider. Toward this end, he sent a dozen vests with his servants, having one of them say, "My master would like these embroidered, each one different, and of all different colors." Frame number 8, and yet again, the young girl began to cry. She didn't know how to embroider either. And like on the other occasions, the 3 spirits appeared, and in short order, they had all of the vests embroidered. "We like very much to do this work," said the spirits, "but we would like you to invite us to the wedding." "Oh, yes, I would love to," answered the young girl. In frame number 9, if you'll turn the page 260. When the Indiano saw all of the embroidered vests, and in such a short amount of time, he thought that he had the most capable or talented, the Spanish word capaz, girlfriend in all of Spain, and he decided to get married immediately. Frame number 10. But the young girl, although happy that her boyfriend loved her, well, she still felt very sad. "How can you be sad?" asked her aunt. "I am worried that my future husband does not know the truth." Her aunt responded, "Yes, my dear, I am also worried that he thinks that you can do all this." Frame 11. The day of the wedding arrived. When everyone was seated, enjoying the splendid banquet, the 3 spirits arrived. They were so old and so ugly that all of the invited guests looked with their mouths wide open. The young girl presented the 3 spirits to her new husband, saying, "Oh, these are very special, 3 very special aunts of mine." The husband talked with them with much affection. To the first one he said, "I ought to ask you, why do you have one arm short and one arm long?" "I have them like that because of all the spinning I have done," she answered. To the second spirit he asked, "Why are your eyes so red and protruding so much?" This spirit answered, I have spent my whole life cutting and sewing. And to the third one, the man asked, why is your body so twisted? The spirit responded, I am this way because of all the leaning I do when I do embroidering. The husband, so much in love with his new wife, said to her, from here on, I do not want you to spin, nor cut, nor sew, nor embroider again the rest of your life. And upon saying this, the three spirits disappeared, and the gentleman and his wife lived happily ever after. Well, that's quite a tale. Let's now listen to this story in Spanish as you follow along in the textbook. Please, again, turn back to page 258 and follow along as we listen to Las Ánimas.
Las ánimas.
Esta leyenda española trata de un indiano que se hizo muy rico con el oro y la plata de las Américas.
Había una vez en Andalucía una viejita con una sobrina linda y buena, pero muy perezosa. La vieja temía morir y dejar a la pobre sobrina sin esposo. ¿Quién iba a querer casarse con ella? No sabía ni hilar, ni coser, ni bordar. No sabía hacer nada. Un día llegó al pueblo un indiano muy rico y guapo que quería casarse. La tía fue inmediatamente al caballero y le dijo que ella tenía una sobrina con tantos talentos que tendría que escribir un libro para contarlos. Él le contestó que le gustaría mucho conocerla. Al día siguiente, cuando el rico indiano vio a la joven, se enamoró de ella al instante. Pero, como era un hombre práctico, decidió preguntarle a la tía si su sobrina sabía hilar. «¿Cómo no?», dijo la vieja. «Le encanta hilar. Ese es su mayor gusto». Al poco rato empezaron a llegar muchos criados con madejas de lino. El jefe de los criados le explicó a la joven: «Dice mi señor que para mañana todo debe estar hilado». La muchacha se puso a llorar porque ella no sabía hilar. «¡Ay, cuánto siento no saber hilar!», dijo, porque ella también se había enamorado del guapo indiano. En ese instante aparecieron 3 ánimas buenas vestidas de blanco y se pusieron inmediatamente a trabajar. Cuando todo el lino estaba transformado en hilo fino, desaparecieron. Cuando a la mañana siguiente llegó el rico caballero indiano, quedó muy impresionado. Pero luego decidió que debía saber si su futura esposa sabía coser. Le preguntó a la viejita y ella le afirmó: «Coser es un placer para ella y lo hace bien y muy rápido». Y otra vez, esa tarde, los criados del caballero llegaron cargados con piezas de lienzo, diciendo: «Dice mi señor que la señorita debe hacer chaquetas y camisas de lienzo para él». Y otra vez, la muchacha, que no sabía nada de cortar ni coser, se puso a llorar. Pero por la noche, las 3 ánimas volvieron y en poco tiempo todo el lienzo estaba transformado en chaquetas y camisas. El caballero indiano no podía creer que tenía una novia tan lista. Pero luego, el rico caballero quería saber si la joven sabía bordar. Con este fin, mandó docenas de chalecos con sus criados, diciendo uno de ellos: «Mi señor los quiere bordados, todos diferentes y de todos los colores». Y otra vez, la muchacha comenzó a llorar. No sabía bordar tampoco. Y como en las otras ocasiones, las tres ánimas aparecieron y en poco tiempo tenían todos los chalecos bordados. «Nos gusta mucho hacer este trabajo», dijeron las ánimas, «pero queremos que usted nos invite a la boda». «Sí, con mucho gusto», contestó la muchacha. Cuando el indiano vio todos los chalecos bordados y en tan poco tiempo, pensó que tenía la novia más capaz de toda España y decidió casarse al instante. Pero la muchacha, aunque contenta de que su novio la amaba, se sentía muy triste. «¿Cómo puedes estar triste?», le preguntó su tía. «Estoy preocupada de que mi futuro marido no sepa la verdad». Su tía le contestó: «Sí, hija, a mí también me inquieta que él piense que tú puedes hacerlo todo». Llegó el día de la boda. Cuando todos estaban sentados disfrutando de un banquete espléndido, llegaron las tres ánimas. Eran tan viejas y feas que todos los invitados las miraron con la boca abierta. La muchacha las presentó a su nuevo marido diciendo: «Son tres tías mías muy especiales». El novio les habló con mucho cariño. A la primera le dijo: «Debo preguntarle por qué tiene un brazo corto y un brazo largo». «Los tengo así por lo mucho que he hilado», le contestó. A la segunda le preguntó: «¿Por qué tiene los ojos tan saltones y colorados?». Esta le contestó: «He pasado la vida cortando y cosiendo». Y a la tercera: «¿Por qué tiene el cuerpo tan torcido?». Ella le contestó: «Estoy así de tanto inclinarme para bordar». El novio, tan enamorado de su nueva esposa, le dijo: «De aquí en adelante, no quiero que tú hiles, ni cortes, ni cosas, ni bordes jamás en tu vida». Y al decir esto, las tres ánimas desaparecieron y el caballero y su esposa fueron muy felices.
Were you able to keep pace with the story as you heard it in Spanish? Do you see the examples of the subjunctive? For homework, let's take a look. Homework number 1. In your textbook, Dime dos, on page 263, do activity A. Make sure you read the instructions and do what it asks you to do. Now turn in your textbook, Dime dos, to page 266. Please turn to page 266. Here we see in the left-hand margin the use of the subjunctive expressions with estar. We're also going to take a look at anticipation or reactions using estar. Estar alegre, to be happy. Estar contento de. Estar contenta de. To be happy with. Estar furioso de. Estar furiosa de. To be angry at. Estar preocupado de. Estar preocupada de. To be preoccupied with. Estar triste. To be sad. Estar triste de. Now let's look at some examples. Estoy muy contento de que vengas. Estoy muy contento de que vengas. Estamos tristes de que tenga que hacerlo otra vez. Estamos tristes de que tenga que hacerlo otra vez. For homework number 2, in Dime Dos, on page 266, activity E, 1 through 8, activity F, 1 through 11. Let's talk a little bit about some basic reading strategies. You know, when you read something in Spanish, if it's new to you, don't panic. There are lots of clues with every reading segment that will help you understand the context of the material. Each reader brings in Spanish to the reading a process that is a unique set of past experiences, emotions, mental processes, level of intellectual development, and interest level in the Spanish language topic. Now, yours may be more advanced than the person sitting next to you. You might be better in one area than a student in another area. So not all reading strategies will be effective for all students. Some strategies might help you. Others may not. Let's open up in our textbook, Dime Dos, to page 269. So if you'll please open up your textbook to page 269. You'll see that on page 269, it suggests that we all have to think when we translate, interpret, or write our Spanish assignments. The textbook suggests that as you prepare to read the article on page 270, the one about Antonio Banderas, the actor, you should prepare yourself with such thoughts as previewing, learning about a text before really reading it. Now, previewing enables readers to get a sense of what the text is about and how it is organized before reading it closely. Now, this simple strategy includes seeing what you can learn from the headnotes or other introductory materials, skimming to get an overview of the content and organization, and identifying the rhetorical situation. Remember, we always ask you to read the instructions first to give you an idea, to predict what is coming. The next strategy, contextualization. Placing a text in its historical, biographical, and cultural contexts. Now, when you read a text, you read it through the lens of your own personal experience. Your understanding of the words on the page and their significance is informed by what you have come to know and value from living in a particular time and place in history. But the texts you read were all written in the past, sometimes in a radically different time and a radically different place. To read critically, you need to contextualize, to recognize the differences between your contemporary values and attitudes and those represented in the reading text. Strategy number 3. Questioning to understand and to remember. Asking questions about the context. As students, you're accustomed, I hope, to teachers asking you questions about your reading. Well, these questions are designed to help you understand a reading and to respond to it more fully. And often, this technique does work. When you need to understand, use new information through its most beneficial point, if you write the questions as you read the text for the first time. With this strategy, you can write questions anytime, but in difficult academic readings, you will understand the material better and remember it longer if you write a question for every paragraph or every brief section. Each question should focus on a main idea, not on illustrations or details, and each should be expressed in your own words, not just copied from parts of the paragraph. The next strategy, reflecting on challenges to your beliefs and values. Examining your personal responses. Now, the reading that you do for this class might challenge your attitudes, your unconsciously held beliefs, or your positions on current issues. As you read a text for the first time, mark an X in the margin at each point where you feel a personal challenge to your attitudes, to your beliefs, or to your status. Make a brief note in the margin about what you feel, or about what in the text created the challenge. Now look again at the places you marked in the text where you felt personally challenged. What patterns do you see? Do you remember when we did the bullfighting? Some of you reacted to the bullfighting. Some of you thought it was very violent. Others of you realized that in a way it's no more violent than, let's say, boxing, for example. Our next strategy, outlining and summarizing. Identifying the main ideas and restating them in your own words. Many of you recognize this from your English classes. Well, obviously it's no different when you're reading Spanish material. Outlining and summarizing are especially helpful strategies for understanding the context and the structure of a specific reading selection. Whereas outlining reveals the basic structure of the text, summarizing synopsises a selection's main argument in brief. Outlining may be part of the annotating process, or it may be done separately, as it is in this class. The key to both outlining and summarizing is being able to distinguish between the main ideas and the supporting ideas and their examples. The main ideas form the backbone, the strand that holds the various parts and pieces of the text together. Outlining the main ideas helps you to discover the structure. When you make an outline, don't use the text's exact words. If you can get into the habit of practicing these strategies, whether it is in Spanish or in English, you will be able to see a marked improvement in your comprehension and your understanding of material. So, homework number 3. We want you to read the article on Antonio Banderas, un galán latino en Hollywood. Then do Verificamos, Activity B and C on page 271. Hoy nosotros tratamos de discutir y aprender. Para empezar, escuchemos una leyenda española, Las Ánimas. We took a look at the uses of the subjunctive with the verb estar. We reviewed some basic strategies for reading. Things like predicting, making descriptions and comparisons, paraphrasing, checking for understanding, and readjusting impressions. We also wanted you to read from the article on Antonio Banderas, Un Galán Latino en Hollywood. The homework assigned. Homework number 1. In your textbook on page 263, Activity A. Homework number 2. From Dime Dos, page 266, Activity E, 1 through 8, and Activity F, 1 through 11. Homework number 3. To read the article on Antonio Banderas, and then go to Verificamos and complete Activity B and Activity C on page 271. Now, some of you may want to go to Antonio Banderas' internet site. If you use the internet, see what you can find out about Antonio Banderas. Okay, I want to spend a few minutes talking to both you, the student, and the facilitator. Facilitator, as you know, at the end of each major unit, and this completes Unit 5, we're going to give an exam. So for next class, facilitator, would you please hand out the exam Form B for Unit 5. Students, that means that you need to prepare. We're getting close now. We have one more major unit, Unit 6, before our ACP. That means that we want you to review lessons 1, 2, and 3 of Unit 5 for the exam. Make sure in your workbook that you review the exercises, that you review the vocabulary, and hopefully many of you have been keeping up with your flashcards and that you've been practicing your Spanish. A good idea is also to review the homework that you've done. As you know, for each section, for each lesson, we provide a certain amount of homework for you to do. If you've been keeping up with your homework, this exam should not be difficult for you. You certainly have had experience with these unit exams already. But we want to make sure that as we get closer now to the end of the semester and the end of Spanish 2, the most important part is not to give up. Now is the time to study more and work harder. If I can give you an analogy, it would be like running in a race. If you're running the quarter-mile race, for example, the last 50 yards of the race are just as important, if not even more important, to give it your best, because you want to cross the finish line and you want to be successful. So next time, facilitator, students, facilitator, you hand out the exam for Unit 5, Form B. As we approach the end of today's class, I want you to pay particular attention to today's recommendations for reading strategies. They're not only important in Spanish, but I think they'll make you a better student. And you know that every class, I end the session by letting you know how important it is to be an excellent student and a student who is well behaved. So, thank you, students, for your continued hard work. Hang in there. We have one more major unit with 3 lessons, and then we'll be taking our ACP, and that will come much faster than you and I will understand. So, stay on task. Facilitator, as always, we appreciate your helping us make each and every class useful for our students. And don't forget, next time we're taking the exam. So, until then, excelencia en academia y excelencia en comportamiento hace por un gran estudiante. Muchas gracias. Adiós. Hola, bienvenidos a Aprendamos Español 2. Yo soy Dr. Daniel Viamonte, su maestro de Español 2, y juntos con su facilitador vamos a trabajar hoy sobre lección 1 de unidad 6. Bueno, la última vez, the last time, we covered in Unit 5, Lesson 3. Escuchemos una leyenda española, Las Ánimas. We took a look at the use of the subjunctive with estar. We did a little reading on the article on Antonio Banderas. We took a look at strategies for reading, for predicting, for making descriptions and comparisons, paraphrasing, checking for understanding, and readjusting impressions. The homework that's due for today. Homework number 1 in Dime Dos, page 263, activity A. Homework number 2, Dime Dos, page 266, activity E, 1 through 8, and activity F, 1 through 11. Homework number 3, read the article on Antonio Banderas, and then do the verifiquemos activity B and C only on page 271. Facilitator, would you please collect the homework now? Hoy nosotros vamos a discutir lección 1 de unidad 6. Para empezar, un cuento de Nuevo México, La Ceniza. We're going to be extending, accepting, and declining invitations. We're going to use expressions of doubt and expressions of certainty. We're going to take a look at Costa Rica. Para empezar, un cuento de Nuevo México, La Ceniza. By the way, ceniza means ashes or cinder. So if you'll turn in your textbook to page 278. So in Dime Dos, page 278. La Ceniza. Is everybody on target on page 278? In this folk tale from New Mexico, a poor man is deceived by his selfish neighbor, and he has a series of misadventures before he is finally rewarded for his trust and for his innocence. The story uses examples of Spanish that are used to extend, accept, and reject suggestions and invitations. In the story, you will see and hear about the dos compadres, one rich and one poor. The rich compadre lived a very serene life, and he did not have to work very much. The word compadre or comadre, which describes the relationship between a child's parents and a child's godparents. In Catholic countries, the compadres and comadres is a very close one. So for this reason, compadre is also used as a synonym for friend. No doubt you have heard someone described as my compadre. As the story begins to unfold, we see that the poor compadre has to work very hard, from sunrise to sunset, while earning very little money. One day, the poor compadre and his wife were discussing their situation. Remember that in traditional societies, it is common for parents to ask a wealthy person, such as a local landowner, to be their padrino. Rich compadres are expected to protect and to help their close friends financially through gifts or helping to get a job or whatever is needed. The poor man's wife is hoping that the rich compadre will fulfill his traditional obligations to the family. Because the poor friend wanted to become rich, he asked his wealthy compadre to tell him the secret of making money. The rich man's answer, which of course was not true, was that he become rich by selling ashes or cinders from the fireplace. The poor friend believed him, and that night both he and his wife began to fill sacks of ashes to sell. They worked until the break of dawn. He then kissed his wife, and off he went to sell the ashes. His wife thought to herself that she was sure he would return rich, just like his compadre. As he tried to sell the bags of ashes, the townspeople were kind-hearted. Others were astonished at the idea, but the majority of the people simply laughed at him. Even though he did not even sell one bag of ashes, he continued going from door to door, trying to sell the ashes. Eventually, the poor man recognized that his rich friend had deceived him. He wanted to return to his family, but was so tired of carrying the bags of ashes that he decided to empty all of the bags. He made a terrible mess of the area, and at that very moment, while he was emptying the bags, an official saw what he was doing and angrily took him off to jail. He was not released from jail for 1 full year later. As he sat on the street curb, a woman saw him, and taking pity on him, gave him un nicle to help him out. With that nickel, he bought a mask of the devil, thinking, "My sons need to know how the devil is." Making his long way home, he decided to rest for the night near a tree. But he heard some horses approaching where he was. He did not want to be seen by anyone, so he put the mask of the devil on and he climbed the tree. Now, 2 thieves, riding the horses, decided that the tree would make a good landmark to bury the sacks of gold that they had robbed. The poor man up in the tree was so curious about what the 2 thieves were doing that he lost his balance and fell to the ground as if from the sky. "The devil!" cried one of the thieves. I think he has come for us, cried the other. They ran away horrified, leaving the horses and the shovels and the sacks of gold. Well, the poor man, he did not know what to do. Finally, he decided to carry the sacks of gold on the horses and return home. And that is how the poor compadre arrived at his home as a rich man with 2 fine horses and sacks of gold. Salió pobre, pero volvió rico. When his rich compadre came to see his former poor compadre, he wanted to know how had he become so rich so quickly. His comrade simply pointed to the ashes in the fireplace and smiled. Let's listen to the story, La Ceniza.
La ceniza.
Este cuento del norte de Nuevo México tiene que ver con 2 compadres, uno rico y el otro pobre.
Para uno de ellos, la vida parecía pasar muy serena. No tenía que trabajar mucho. El otro compadre tenía una vida muy difícil. Trabajaba de sol a sol, pero ganaba muy poco. Un día, el compadre pobre y su esposa estaban discutiendo sus problemas. ¿Por qué no vas a ver a nuestro compadre?, sugirió la mujer. Es posible que pueda decirte el secreto. ¿Cómo mejorar nuestra fortuna? Lo dudo, dijo su marido. No creo que él quiera ayudarnos, pero sí puedo hablar con él. Y el compadre pobre se fue a visitar a su compadre rico. Trabajo muy duro todo el día, le dijo, pero la mayor parte del tiempo mi esposa y yo nos acostamos con hambre. Quiero vivir como tú. ¿Es posible que me digas tu secreto? ¿Cómo puedo hacerme rico? El compadre rico le contestó: solo porque eres tú, te voy a ayudar. Voy a decirte mi secreto. Yo me hice rico vendiendo ceniza. Tú debes hacer lo mismo. Por supuesto, el compadre rico no estaba diciendo la verdad, pero el pobre se lo creyó todo. Esa noche, el compadre pobre y su esposa empezaron inmediatamente a llenar sacos de ceniza. No dejaron de trabajar hasta la madrugada, cuando el carro estaba cargado de sacos de ceniza. El compadre pobre le dio un beso a su mujer y se fue a vender ceniza. Su esposa pensó: estoy segura que va a volver rico, como su compadre. Algunas gentes eran bondadosas con el pobre hombre. Otras se asombraban, pero la mayoría se reía de él. Es probable que esté loco, decían. Pero aunque no vendía ni siquiera un puñado de ceniza, el pobre hombre seguía de puerta en puerta por días, luego por semanas y aún por meses. Poco a poco, el pobre hombre reconoció que su compadre lo había engañado. Y como echaba terriblemente de menos a su familia, decidió volver a casa. Como ya no tenía sentido seguir cargando los sacos de ceniza, empezó a arrojar la ceniza. Hacía una cochinada. En ese momento, llegó un oficial y, muy enojado, se lo llevó a la cárcel. No salió de la cárcel hasta un año después. El pobre hombre estaba muy cambiado y se sentía totalmente fracasado. Pensaba: ¿cómo es posible que sea tan desafortunado? Cuando una señora vio al pobre hombre en la calle, le dio lástima
y le regaló un nicle para ayudarlo. Con el nicle, el pobre compró una máscara de diablo pensando: creo que mis hijos deben saber cómo es el diablo. En el largo camino a casa, el pobre hombre se preparaba para pasar la noche cuando oyó acercarse unos caballos. No queriendo ser visto por nadie, se puso la máscara de diablo y se subió a un árbol. 2 ladrones a caballo se detuvieron debajo del árbol y empezaron a enterrar unos sacos llenos de monedas de oro. El compadre los veía con tanta curiosidad que perdió el equilibrio y se cayó al suelo. ¡El diablo!, gritó uno. «Creo que viene por nosotros», dijo el otro, y los 2 ladrones se fueron corriendo horrorizados. El pobre hombre no sabía qué hacer. Por fin, decidió cargar los sacos de monedas de oro en los caballos y llevárselos a casa. Así es que el compadre pobre llegó a casa hecho un hombre rico, con 2 caballos finos y sacos de oro. Cuando el compadre rico vino a ver a su compadre, este quería saber cómo llegó a ser tan rico tan pronto. El compadre, que había sido pobre, simplemente señaló la ceniza en la hoguera y sonrió.
Were you able to follow the story? Did it make sense to you as to what happened to the poor man and why he laughed at the end when his rich compadre asked him how he became so rich so quickly? Let's take a look at homework number 1. In your textbook, Dime Dos, page 284, para empezar, activity A, 1 through 8. Let's do some activities in Spanish that builds on what you already know about the subjunctive. In a way, we'll be reviewing the subjunctive. Now, let's take a look at indirect and direct object pronouns. The direct object pronouns, the subject is yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, ustedes, ellos, y ellas. Now, the indirect object pronoun would be me, te, le, nos, for nosotros, and les, y les, para de ustedes, ellos, and ellas. So there you have the subject direct and the indirect object pronoun. Now, since the pronouns me, te, nos can be either direct or indirect object pronouns, this exercise that we're going to focus on focuses on the difference between all third-person pronouns. So in the direct object pronouns, lo, la, for him, her, it, you, the formal you, the usted, lo, las, them, and then what in Texas we commonly hear, you all, the formal ustedes, all of you, in the plural. For the indirect object pronouns, le, for him, her, and les, two are for them, two are for you, all in the formal. Now, how do we distinguish between direct objects and indirect objects in a sentence? Well, let's take a look at the following two examples in English. Mr. Garcia has a daughter who participated in a foreign exchange program. Mr. Garcia sent her to Spain. Mr. Garcia sent her the money. In the first sentence, what did Mr. Garcia send? I'm sure that you can see that in the first sentence, he is actually sending his daughter. He puts her on the plane and watches it fly away with her in the plane. Now, in the second sentence, what is it that Mr. Garcia is sending? Is he putting his daughter on the plane this time? Well, it's probably obvious to you that in the second example sentence, he's not sending his daughter somewhere. He is sending the money. In the second sentence, her really means to her. Could you change her to her in the first example and still mean the same thing? That would be, he sent to her to Spain. Well, that doesn't make sense in English. And it doesn't make sense in Spanish either. Now, this is very important. What he actually sends is the direct object. And who he sends it to is the indirect object. Well, I hope using these two sentences that this is a little clearer for you. Let's take a look at another example. Decide which is the direct object and which is the indirect object in the following sentence. Mary is going to fix me a sandwich. Now, what is Mary going to fix? If we're not careful, we might say Mary is going to fix me. Well, that would, of course, be silly. Now, I'm not broken, and Mary doesn't need to fix me. What we really mean here is that Mary is going to fix, that is to say, prepare, not repair, a sandwich. And that she is going to do it for me. It seems to me that the meaning of the sentence is very clear. Mary is going to fix me a sandwich. What was the direct object in that sentence? The direct object in the sentence is sandwich. That's what she is going to fix for me. What is the subject in this sentence? The subject of this sentence is Mary. She is doing the action. What is the indirect object in that sentence? The indirect object in that sentence is me. Mary is going to fix the sandwich for me. Notice that me can really be used to mean to me, or as in this past example, for me. When me actually means to me or for me, it is the indirect object. When me is the direct object, you could not change it to me or for me without making the sentence sound strange or odd, at least changing the meaning. Well, now, we need to see how Spanish does the same thing. Let's take a look at the following sentence. Prestar means to lend. Prestar. Juan Me presta el dinero. Who is lending something? John is lending something. What is the person lending? He is lending the money. Now tell me who the indirect object is in this same sentence. He is lending the money to me. The indirect object in this sentence is me. Dime dos, page 284. Let's take a look at extending, accepting, and declining invitations as activity C. Me invitas. Let's look at the model and notice the clues. Correr. Practicar el piano. You would say, voy a correr. ¿Me acompañas? Your compañero or compañera would say, gracias, pero tengo que practicar el piano. You are letting your companion know that you are going for a run, and you're inviting that person to run with you. Your compañero is declining. Gracias, thank you, pero tengo que practicar el piano. But I have to practice the piano. You could also say, lo siento, pero tengo que practicar el piano. Okay? So that's the model for this activity. So for homework number 2, you want to do activity C in Dime dos on page 284, numbers 1 through 8. Let's now have a review of expressions of doubt. Here's a list of common expressions that introduce an aspect of ignorance or doubt to the sentence, and therefore trigger the use of the subjunctive. So notice, dudar que, to doubt that. Es dudoso que, es dudoso que. It is doubtful that. Notice we're giving expressions of doubt. Es improbable que. Es improbable que. It's unlikely that. Es incierto que. Es incierto que. It's uncertain that. Es posible que. It's possible that. Es posible que. No creer que. Not to believe that. No creer que. No es cierto que. No es cierto que. It's not certain that. No estar convencido de que. No estar convencido de que. And that means to not be convinced that. No estar seguro de que. No estar seguro de que. Not to be sure that. No parecer que. To not seem that. No parecer que. No pensar que. No pensar que. To not think that. No suponer que. No suponer que. To not suppose that. Puede ser que. It may be that. Puede ser que. Negar que. Negar que. To deny that. No es verdad que. No es verdad que. It is not true that. No es cierto que. No es cierto que. It is not certain that. No imaginarse que. No imaginarse que. To not imagine that. Temer que. Temer que. To suspect that. There are expressions that trigger the use of the indicative mood, since they introduce a quality of certainty. Here's a partial list of expressions that trigger the use of the indicative mood. No dudo que. No dudo que. To not doubt that. Estar seguro de que. To be certain that. Estar seguro de que. Creer que. To think that. No negar que. To not deny that. Es verdad que. It's true that. Remember, these are expressions that need a complete phrase after it so that you know what it is that they're doing. Now let's discuss expressions of certainty. Remember, there are also impersonal expressions that trigger the use of the indicative mood, since they introduce a quality of certainty or objectivity. Here's a partial list of such expressions. Es evidente que. Es evidente que. It is certain that. Es obvio que. Es obvio que. It is obvious that. Es verdad que. It's true that. Es verdad que. No es dudoso que. No es dudoso que. It is not doubtful that. No hay duda que. No hay duda que. There is no doubt that. Now for homework number 3, in Dime Dos, your textbook, on pages 286 and 287. Activity D, 1 through 10, and Activity E, 1 through 8. In this segment, we want to take a look at one of the countries in Central America. We want to take a look at Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica is the ideal country for a vacation. You can enjoy a tropical paradise where democracy reigns and the locals are friendly and helpful. Temperatures vary little year-round, making Costa Rica ideal for a year-round visit. In Dime Dos, starting on page 291, so would you please turn to 291 in Dime Dos, through 293, so through the next 3 pages, I want you to look at the pictures. I want you to look at the maps and the photos accompanying this text and try to predict what this particular reading will discuss. Remember when we talked about strategies for reading? Now, Costa Rica is home to one of the oldest democracies in the Americas. The country has been noted for its friendliness and preoccupation with peace. Its policy of active neutrality has twice earned it the nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1987, this prestigious award was presented to the then President of the Republic, Dr. Oscar Arias. This was the fact that over a quarter of its territory enjoys protection in the ever-growing network of national parks and reserves, its continued dedication to environmental protection, and many other reasons are really the answer as to why Costa Rica has repeatedly been referred to as the Switzerland of the Americas. Now let's talk a little bit about the government of Costa Rica. It's a democracy, similar to the democracy in the United States. The 3 branches of government, the executive, or president, the 2 vice presidents, plus the advisors. The legislative branch has 57 deputies. The judicial, 17 magistrates on the Supreme Court. Do you remember or do you know how many we have in the United States? That's correct. We have 9 Supreme Court judges. Correct. Now the president and deputies are elected by popular vote to a 4-year term with no re-election privileges. Magistrates are appointed by the legislature for an 8-year term. The Elections Tribunal is an independent organization to oversee the elections. Political candidates generally belong to 2 major parties, the PLN and the PUSC. However, there are several lesser parties active in politics and in elections. It's important to note that there is no army. There is only a National Civilian Guard composed of some 3,000 volunteers to help when emergency situations arise. The geography of Costa Rica. It's located on the isthmus between North and South America. An isthmus is a narrow strip of land connecting 2 large land areas. It sits between 8 and 11 degrees north latitude. It's bordered to the north by Nicaragua and to the south by Panama, to the west by the Pacific Ocean, and to the east by the Caribbean Sea. The land area, approximately 19,700 and some odd square miles, it's about the size of our West Virginia in the United States. There are 288 miles at its longest peak, and it's 160 miles maximum width along the northern border. 74 miles is the minimum width along the southern border. There are 631 miles of Pacific coastline. It is possible that you could have breakfast on the Pacific Ocean and have lunch or dinner on the Caribbean Sea. A state-funded compulsory system of education was established in 1869. The state system includes learning institutions at all levels. The state currently spends about 27% of its national budget on education. 70% of secondary education is provided by public schools. There are some 3,879 educational centers educating more than 780,000 students, including 60,000 university-level students. 93% of the population has at least basic reading and writing skills. Before I assign the next homework number 4, on page 291 in your textbook, will everyone please turn to page 291. Here we're looking at antes de empezar, before we begin our reading, which will be the homework number 4. Antes de empezar. Are we all on the same page? Good. Yo digo que. ¿Cuánto sabes de Costa Rica? How much do you know about Costa Rica? Indica si crees que estos comentarios son ciertos o falsos. We want you to indicate if the following statements that we'll be reading here in a moment are true or false. Si no estás seguro or segura, if you're not really sure, adivina usando lo que ya sabes de Latinoamérica, which means that if you're not really sure, try to apply what you already have learned about Latin America. Yo digo que, number 1, Costa Rica, como los otros países latinoamericanos, tiene una historia muy violenta. Does Costa Rica, like the other countries in Latin America, have a very violent history? What do you think? True or false? Would it surprise you to know that Costa Rica does not have a violent history? Number 2. En Costa Rica es posible nadar en el Océano Atlántico por la mañana y en el Pacífico por la tarde del mismo día. ¿Qué crees? What do you think? ¿Cierto? Falso? Well, if you look at the map just below, you'll see that the Atlantic Ocean is not listed. It's the Caribbean Sea, el Mar Caribe. So had it said el Mar Caribe, then it would be true. But since it says the Atlantic Ocean, es falso. False. Número 3. En Costa Rica, la mayor parte de la población vive en el Valle Central. In Costa Rica, the majority of the population live in the Central Valley of the country, in the center of the country. Well, now you may not know the answer to that. Take a guess. The answer is yes. The capital of the country, San Jose, is located in the Central Valley of the country. So the majority of the population is in the center. Número 4. El clima de Costa Rica varía mucho. Frío en las montañas, calor en el Valle Central y templado en las costas. What do you think? Well, when you read in the next page, you will be able to give the answer to that question. So I'll let you think about that until you've had a chance to read. Number 5. En Costa Rica, ¿hay selva tropical con todo especies de animales? One of the things we're going to learn about Costa Rica in the next few pages is that they are one of the leading countries for environment. And at one time they were losing their forests at a very rapid rate. But being conservative and having a plan, they've become one of the leaders in saving their forests. So the answer is, well, I think you know. The answer is C. La selva tropical en Costa Rica siempre ha sido protegido por el gobierno federal. No, it wasn't always protected by the federal government. It was the federal government that helped the Costa Rican people realize how important it was to conserve their forests. 7. El gobierno federal costarricense, como el de los Estados Unidos, ha establecido un sistema de parques nacionales para proteger la ecología. Yes, I think we have both, the United States and Costa Rica, now provided a national park system to preserve our forests, our waters, our mountains, our deserts. Número 8. ¿Costa Rica tiene una larga tradición de democracia? Sí. They are a very stable democracy. You will find very little difference except for the language when you travel either within the United States or within Costa Rica. Number 9. La Constitución de Costa Rica no permite tener ejército. There is no army in Costa Rica. Now they do have a National Guard, which are used for emergencies, everything from tornadoes or hurricanes to forest fires and things of that nature. But they do not have an army. And number 10, in 1987, the President of Costa Rica received the Nobel Prize for Peace. Well, yes, we already heard that they had. So, now you know a little bit more about Costa Rica. Let's see if we can learn anything when we turn the page on 292 that we didn't know before or that now we understand. The homework for number 4 is to read Costa Rica, rica en todo sentido. That's on page 292 and 293. We want you to do, when you finish reading it, verifiquemos on page 293, numbers 1, 2, and 3. Today, we covered in Lesson 1 of Unit 6, Un cuento de Nuevo México, La ceniza. We took a look at extending, accepting, and declining invitations in Spanish. We reviewed a list of expressions of doubt and a list of expressions of certainty. And we took a look at Costa Rica. The homework for next time. Homework number 1, Dime dos, page 284, para empezar. Activity A, 1 through 8. Tarea número 2, Dime dos, Activity C, 1 through 8. The third tarea, and Dime dos also, pages 286 and 287, Activity D, 1 through 10, and Activity E, 1 through 8. And homework number 4, we want you to read Costa Rica, rica en todo sentido, on Dime dos, page 292 through 293, and then write out the verifiquemos on page 293, numbers 1, 2, and 3. Well, that concludes our lesson for today. I want to thank you, students, for your continued hard work. And remember, we're getting close now to the ACP, and it's important that you stay on task. Don't forget to do your homework. Facilitator, as always, we appreciate your helping us make each and every class useful for our students. So until next time, excelencia en academia y excelencia en comportamiento hace por un gran estudiante. Muchas gracias. Adiós.